Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Alrighty guys, so we have a few things on the docket today. One thing I want to do again is, last time I did a little bit of like smoothing and puttying on FDM prints, and I'll do that towards the end because that seemed to be something people were interested in seeing, and that's pretty quick, so I'll just save it for the end. The other thing I want to do is, we started a Marauder the other day, which is now here. Unfortunately, I lost that stream, so hold on one moment. I just realized it's not in this room. Alrighty, that wasn't so great of a start. I just had to search through the house for the other miniature. So, we have two miniatures. I chose to go with one of the Blattech Victors, the City Tech ones, because I thought, like, you know what? This was very kindly donated to me a long time ago. And it'd be fun to kind of bring it to life. I know we have the new awesome sculpt coming out, but I'm not going to let this thing just sit there and never have paint just because there's another sculpt coming out. So, what happened here so far is this got a zenithal base coat. So I went from a dark green from the underside. Let's get a little more light on this. Okay, there's a dark green on the underside, and then there's kind of a light yellowish green from the top, and you can kind of see the difference. There you go, as I go from there to there, right? Then it got a dry brush of Vallejo. You are watching it. Yeah, we've been sponsored by Duramic, a filament I don't actually like that much. So give it a quick dry brush, and then the only other thing I changed from last time was I did do a little bit of dry pigment in there, which has completely disappeared at this point, because I figured this old City Tech sculpt, let's treat it like it's rusty, but that's completely gone now. And the only other thing was a green wash of Vallejo green wash, all right? And that's where we started this from, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this to the point of this Marauder, and then since it needs dry time, we're gonna pick up the Marauder and continue it from there, okay? I figured that'd be an easy way to do this. Hey! Welcome everyone. And Mike, just so you know, we're going to do a quick FDM putty thing at the end. It only takes a few minutes, and this time this should be recorded, luckily. So I think I've solved that issue. So yeah, we did a few things last time. We also played with this Dervish, which we might play a little more with, especially because I have... Oh. Can y'all still hear me right now? I just lost my headset, and I'm hoping the microphone switched over seamlessly. Okay, it seems like it did. Excellent. Okay, so in that case, we have also this Orion, which started from the same batch as that. So let's start with this Victor. We're going to do exactly what we did to the Marauder last time. Let's see if the light's better without this. Yeah, it might be. It's a little yellower, but yeah. All right, we're going to do exactly what we did to the Marauder. In terms of getting it to where the Marauder was. And then we're going to pick up the Marauder and go from there and take this a few steps further. Okay? So, as usual, we're going to be doing this with oil paints because that's my whole jam. I love the oil paints. And we are going to start, as always nowadays, by referencing my handy-dandy paint notebook, which was suggested to me by Ryan, B1B Flyer, and I have never given up since. I've been pretty studious about keeping up on it. Okay, so what we have so far, Davian Drab, right? I did a Rust Red Primer, and I know that sounds like it doesn't matter, but every now and then some of that peeks through, so you don't want that, you know, like a white primer or something. I do try to keep it consistent in terms of the primer I use on these two. Right? Rust Red Primer, Zenithal, so I went from Vallejo Hobby Spray Dark on the underside, Russian Green, Vallejo Hobby Spray Russian Uniform Green as the midtone, and then Desert Yellow, a little spritz on top. Alright, and we'll see that again, like, here you go, kind of yellow, dark green. Look at the shoulder pad, that's a good place to look. And it gets darker, it's darker. Oh, dark green, there we go. All right. Okay, Next was my dry brush with Reaper Master Series Olive Green and Vallejo Model Color Stone Gray. I've actually eliminated this olive green step as it's kind of superfluous and just gets kind of gone over by the Stone Gray. I also noted in my book that I do a makeup brush. The effect of dry brushing with a makeup brush is very different from dry brushing with a normal brush, so I do need to note that at this point. It kind of gives finer edge highlights and more even coverage, okay? The downside is if you have even a tiny bit too much paint on that brush, it will just completely cover everything, okay? Next, the Vallejo Game Color Green Wash, all right? And now we're up to the oil shade. So our first oil shade is a shade versus a highlight. I usually try to note that. It's pretty obvious usually because, you know, dark colors are shades, light colors are highlights, but, you know, just to make it clear to everyone else doesn't necessarily have these brands of paint in hand. I have passed on these recipes before, so I try to keep track of it now. All right, so Make Jimenez Field Green is going to be our shadow. We're going to go ahead and pop some of that on this extra 3D printer bed, which is what I'm kind of using for everything now. Very handy to have. All right. And then our highlight, which I'll go ahead because it's oils. I don't need to worry about it drying out. Our highlight is Yellow Bun with a dash of Field Green. And again, as these go on, I kind of notice that I can take shortcuts. So 2 shortcuts I've taken with these is I've started to introduce a tiny bit of dark brown to the green. And I've also, which I'm looking for right now as we speak, dark brown, and I've also started to introduce a little bit of yellow ochre to the yellow bone, because that's a step that I did later after some layers of filtering, glazing, etc. But I've noticed that I can kind of compress some of this, and that's so the downsides of just experimenting through. But eventually you do kind of, you know, this will be the one that makes a, actually the Victor will make 13, unfortunately, not a company. I went from 11 to 13. We do get to see some streamlining elements in here. Okay. So we're going to pick just kind of like a medium-sized makeup brush to show you relative to this. Okay, that's about the size of it. So not the size of the head. You know, you don't really need to go too fine with this. I could actually probably go a bit bigger, but I'm not gonna. All right, we're going to go in with this dark green. Somehow I got some yellow bone on there, which is not good. And we're going to get a little bit of that dark brown as well. All right, mix it up and layer. Okay, that seems pretty thin. You want that saturation, so you're kind of mixing it up in there. Mixing it up. Okay. Now we're going to start. Oops. We're going to start hitting these shadows. By the way, guys, if you haven't caught Bushido's video, it's great. It's really funny to watch him try to say names of paints in Spanish. Definitely kind of like Peggy Hill trying to speak Spanish, you know? Really entertaining. Some good paint stuff too, but like really, I'm in there for Kevin speaking Spanish. All right, so we're just going in there in the shadows. Oh, he didn't have it set to record either? Oh no. Man, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad I got to catch it though. I think those Nova Cats look so good. I always want to call them Ghost Bears for some reason. I think it's just that color pairing to me. Okay. See, it's kind of a subtle effect. I compare this a lot to airbrushing, or like a poor man's airbrush, because, and I say the same thing about dry pigments, you kind of just wave your brush at the area, and then it gets some color. I should be recording. I tested it twice earlier today. I will be extremely frustrated if that's not true. Unfortunately, it seems that Twitch is only going to keep it up for 14 days anyway, because I am not a premium or affiliate or whatever term they use. So that's unfortunate, but hopefully we can screen cap it or, you know, somehow gather it up from here in the meantime. I've also tried to set my phone to save a hard copy. We'll see if that's successful. That I'm not sure if I did right. Went a little too heavy there. I know it's a little hard to see because of the glare of the wet oil paints, but once we do this a little bit, I'll take a step back and we'll kind of look at it. And again, I know this is not the sexy new Kickstarter sculpt probably everyone was expecting to see, but it's what I had around, and I'm not leaving it unpainted. I'm also, as some of you may or may not know, kind of like an apologist for bad sculpts. I kind of really like them. I like trying to rescue things like old toys and kind of mediocre sculpts. I didn't wind up adding any bits to this. I did a slight repose. I just chopped it here at the waist ring and at the two hands just to give the arms a little bit of activity and give it a little bit of a bend, but really didn't do much to this at all to try and bring it to life. Alright, now so where these shadows are going, you're seeing them kind of just hitting some... Sorry, I look up every now and then just to read this. Move my Victor a few inches to the left. How about I move my camera that way? Does that help more? Alright, so as for where my shadows are going, that's, I know, like, one of the things that really caught me up in the beginning, and one of the things that, like, catches a lot of people up at all skill levels, and I think there's, you know, you could go for that realistic and really kind of determine where your light is going. For a lot of these battle mechs, I try to just kind of do a very impressionistic, like, accentuate the shape. As Kevin said, really respect the sculpt, kind of just try to bring out some of its forms by dappling it with light and shadow. So, okay. So far, you can basically see some of that darkness. It's very evident on this pauldron over here. A little bit on the legs. Overall, let's turn on this light for a moment. It's going to wash out for 1 sec. There we go. There. You can kind of see it. Actually, is this better for y'all? Do you prefer it with this light? Y'all tell me if this is better. Let's go for it. Okay. So now we're going to go in and start bringing out the light. So yellow bone, dash of field green, and a tiny bit of this yellow too, which is just kind of skipping me ahead a step to the last step where I do a lot of the yellow. Okay. So we're going to start over here on the shoulder. Also, you don't know the contortions my head and neck are doing right now to be able to see this mech while I work and also keep it in frame. I look like that giant from Big Fish with that kind of crouched over head right now. I'm like bent off to the side just to be able to see it. Okay, I will keep it down here. Carl the Giant. Carl. Alright, so we're just hitting the, kind of basically the opposite of the spots we were hitting a moment ago, right? Where we were hitting on one side of the panel with our dark green and our brown, we're now going to hit it with the yellow and white. That's just going to give us this nice contrast. And you can see mostly I'm doing, you know, lights on the top of the panel and darks on the bottom. However, there are exceptions to this. Over here on this gun barrel, it's reversed because I want that little shadow there to kind of accentuate this step down between the two barrels, right? Like this is able to reciprocate into the barrel. And not only is it indicating shadow, but it's also kind of a, you know, a stand-in for things like grease and oil and wear and tear, right? We're kind of combining a lot of things, which is a lot of this game. Like, we have a very limited selection of tools, right? Light, dark, and color are really all we have, and we have to use those to kind of represent everything possible, right? Weathering, shadow, light, camouflage. So you kind of have to pick your battles about, like, sometimes I'm just going to combine these two together and call that's all of them together. That's light and shadow and weathering. Done. Okay. Hope everyone's Saturday is going pretty well so far. Mine's been relaxing, and then a last-second scramble to, of course, get this Victor ready, which was in bare plastic. It's bare silver plastic until about 20 minutes ago. And I quickly got everything on it, hair dried it to get it dry in time. I'm not painting camo. Oh yeah, everyone knows I hate it. It's both a mix of I hate it because I find it difficult to do, not enjoyable, and the other thing is I actually don't mind it on larger scales. I don't really love it on 6mm. I think, you know, when you're dealing with your biggest forms being a few millimeters, I don't want anything to kind of obscure my forms. Especially given how many things I sculpt myself, and I'm like, the forms I put a lot of work into those forms, I don't want to hide them. Okay, I think we might be getting a little too much glare from the camera, from the light again, so I might have to switch that off in a moment. Let's see how this goes. There we go, you can kind of see now. Alright, no, we're not quite here yet. But we're getting there. Alright. We're going to get some more extreme, kind of just bone white now. I'm not even doing any of that dash of field green. I want to go and hit some of the points that I hit the first time. Now with just pure white. As you can see, you know, oil painting is pretty relaxing, to me at least. Just kind of moving a makeup brush across a mini. I need to be particularly careful. These aren't tiny careful strokes I'm doing or anything. I'm just kind of waving my magic wand of makeup brush around and slowly depositing and building up colors. Or in this case, light and shadow more than color. That is the new MAD, that's correct. Good. More than happy to drop that down here so it can stay on screen. Well, let me try and refocus this a little bit. There we go, great. You can see if you go a little heavy or it gets a little blocky, you just kind of feather it out a little extra, not a big deal. And I go a little extreme on these, oh, it's okay. You know, to each their own. Some people like no highlights, some people like very heavy highlights. Some people like sharp, like edge-lined highlights. And, you know, there's different ways to make it pop on a table. There's that balance between making it look whatever quote-unquote realistic is, right? That's a different metric for everyone. But there's a lot of different ways to tackle this. Okay, so weird thing here, you can see on the front, I put my highlight up top, right? And the shade on the bottom of the pelvis, crotch, whatever you want to call it. On the bottom, I did the opposite because I'm thinking, you know what? These jump jets are going to make a big old shadow over here. So I'm going to go ahead and move this to the bottom where it was top on the other side. And the other thing is, it pops well like that, right? There's something about that that looks nice. And I tend to, whenever I have an overhang, I tend to move the highlight down on the piece underneath. I tend to reverse the highlights there, because I feel like that reads a lot better. Yeah, the new mat is really nice. They've actually done some revisions to the sculpt since I got mine to kind of make some of the details pop a little more, which is really nice. Same happened to a lot of the Warhammer, all the early ones. As you may or may not know, the Warhammer, the Rifleman, the Archer, they've been done for about 5-6 years. It's just legal stuff that held them up with Harmony Gold. So they've just kind of been waiting in the wings, and since then, obviously, Anthony Scroggins is not a miniatures painter, and neither is Alex Zimmerzeal, so since they got more feedback in the meantime, and they started to adjust some of those older sculpts to make them a little bit more miniature friendly, as opposed to just looking good on a digital screen. Okay, we're starting to get there. Look at that. As to why this one is reading more... Sorry, I gotta pull it away from the camera for one moment for me. I forgot. So this one is reading a little bit more green, and this one a little bit more brown, but I forgot that I did that rust red dry pigment on this. And that's probably part of what's starting to bend that color a little bit. So I'm gonna grab a little bit more field green. See you, Kevin. Thank you for coming by, man. Appreciate it. So I'm grabbing over here a little bit more of the field green, the darker color. I'm going to blend that in a little bit more with some of these spots. Make sure a little more green as opposed to brown kind of gets in there. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing. I mixed the brown directly into the green. So I did a few things. I made some mistakes, but as I said, I thought this would streamline the process, and very quickly I just learned not streamline the process, it makes a different color. So, good to know. That is how you learn that stuff. For better or worse. Alright, we're doing a little more green. I still had quite a bit of yellow bone in this brush, so I didn't darken it as much as I wanted. So I'm going to go back. There we go. Get some straight up green on these legs. There, that's nice. That makes a difference. Now pushing that highlight up a little bit, so now it only lives kind of on the top half of that, which is that helps it pop a little bit. If you do kind of an even fade throughout a panel, it doesn't pop quite as much as if you do kind of a quarter, if that makes sense. Kind of a curvature where it's mostly mid-tone and then a tiny, tiny bit of extreme shadow and a tiny bit of extreme highlight. That tends to pop a little bit more, in my opinion. Well, it's the only kind of blending with oils, it seems like. There's really a... Yeah, this stuff, the downside of it is it definitely does take a while to dry. Not as bad as everyone thinks, especially if you seal it between layers, which I definitely do. I think it would otherwise take a day or two to dry, and I definitely don't have the patience for that, so. Here we go. So there. So this brings this guy pretty much to the Marauder, okay? So the only things that happened that with the Marauder that didn't happen with this Victor is this got a coat of dry pigments afterwards, but I had to wait a day for that to dry before I could dry pigment it, because remember, dry pigment it's dust, right? It is essentially it is an abrasive material, so if I tried to scrub this with dry pigment, which tends to be a harder application, I'd lose a lot of my paint. So what I had to do was, this was from yesterday, I let it dry for a day, I did the dry pigments, I sealed it up, and now we're going to continue with it today, and this guy's going to go off to the side now. What's going on, Josh? All right. Josh is probably disappointed that I'm using the Old Sculpt Victor, because I think he's printed one of the new ones by now. Josh is the official Mac the Maker, is kind of the official printer of the all the prototypes that you've been seeing come out. All right, sorry, I need to go to my paint log. I froze for a moment, forgetting my next step. Okay, so I've done. Heyo. All right, I've done oils, shades, highlights, and on this Marauder, I've also done the dry pigment. So my next stage is oils, and it's a highlight of straight up yellow bone. All right. So first I gotta kind of, I don't really bother to clean the brush. I just kind of like soak it with more of the paint. It's kind of a grody way to do this, but you know what? It's fine. We'll get a little yellow bone in there as well. I am liking the way that the yellow bone, ochre. The ochre tends to make the yellow bone even a little yellowier. Alright, that seems about the right amount. And I probably should be going down to a smaller brush, but let's live dangerously. Alright, so now we're basically amping up the light. So look at this one, ready? And we'll see it start to wash out, basically. There you go. Okay, so as this, we're gonna do just the tip of the gun pods to start, and I'm gonna let you all take a look and see what this second layer does to the overall look, okay? So now the brightest point on here that remains is probably the cockpit. And if you look at just how much brighter those gun pods are than anything else, right? That's what going back and doing that second layer does. Yeah, this pad was very handy. I think it was you that recommended Duramic to me, right? And I was saying earlier, great top finish on the filament. I don't really love some of the other stuff. I think it does a very poor job with overhangs. But the top layers are really nice, and that matte finish looks cool. Alright. Now we're going in, we're amping up all that. You know what? I'm going to try and focus on one side to start. That way I can just flip it over and you can see the difference. I usually go back and forth and do the same element on each side, but we're gonna mix that up just to try and show this process a little more clearly. And I suppose most people probably do this, but I do tend to, I rotate the miniature, not the brush. This is that's an old trick from drawing with a pencil or a stylus as well. You draw one line. You learn to draw one line really well, and then you rotate the paper around for it, okay? So my motion is kind of this, all right? I have my hand kind of stabilized like that, just sitting down, all right? And then I'm just moving this back and forth. And I tend to move the miniature around that. Basically what I'm saying is that I could be replaced with a very simple machine that just rotates a miniature and goes like this. Okay. And we'll flip this over in a moment to start to see how that kind of changed the way this looks. I want a little more yellow because it needs to warm up right now. It's not getting as much life as I want. Okay, so here we go. One side and other side. Side with the brighter highlights. Side with that. Oh, the Dalematic would definitely have a more charming personality for sure. That's without a doubt right there. All right, so you see what happens here. Now, bear in mind, the next step in my paint book is going to be hitting this whole thing with a thinned out wash of AP Military Shader, which I can't so much do, again, because I'd have to seal it and dry it. But what that's going to do is that's going to tone all of those highlights down quite a bit. It's going to warm them up with a little bit of that yellow-brown color that's inherent to it. So while these seem very extreme right now, that is going to get toned down like a lot in the next step, okay? And you know, it's also a matter of taste. If you like it like this, there's nothing wrong with that either. I think it does look cool with the very extreme light too. You're just kind of hitting that taste level of where you like. And the other thing to look at is like, you know, how far away do you want it to pop, right? Let's focus on him for a second. So, again, you can see the spots I already did, right? It's very evident which spots I've hit with the new layer, okay? And then, there you go, all right? So now that this is pretty distant, you can see that these highlights really accentuate a lot of the points of the model. Are they accurate representation of the way that light works? No, not at all. But you're going in there and you're seeing, hey, here's the tips of the toes, right? I can see those. Now that's evident for me from a distance. I can see the top of the calf bulge, okay? That's an evident shape. And where this piece ends. There's the pivot, right? It's highlighted really nicely on the top half and it's implied in the bottom, right? Top of the leg. Now I know where the top of the leg is even from pretty far away, okay? And again, would a highlight actually be there? No, it'd probably be over here. But this really shows me the differentiation between this intake and the piece next to it, okay? And the same goes for these plates over here, all right? And all these little components. So while this isn't the most realistic representation of light by any means, it does really help this to pop, and it's not too jarring either. And it also, very importantly for me, it's a fun process. I'm not struggling to do this. I'm actually going to move the Duramic mat out. That'll give me a truer color representation. Alright, what side am I supposed to be on? Oh, this side. Okay. Sorry about the white balance, guys. I've managed to lock the focus length, but the white balance is something I have not managed to figure out how to lock yet. As I'm using my phone camera, unfortunately a lot of the settings are limited on this. Ah, hi Abby. Death Commando Irby, you say? Bloop. Unfortunately, it is not really 15 mil, not 10 mil. There was a math error on the part of the person scaling it, and it's kind of like I guess like a 12 mil Irby or something. Really hits like an awkward middle ground of not being particularly matchy to anything else. My big Panther's in the other room, my 10 mil Panther. It's actually approaching done. I just figured out some elements I wanted to add to the base, and I'm pretty excited about where it's going, to be honest. There are simple elements, but they're helping to tell a story. I took a Clix SRM infantryman and added him firing a missile to the base, and it's a fence that he's kind of striding over, a chain link fence, which was something I've just worked out how to print, so I was pretty excited for that as well. Okay, and here, let's get that against this. There you go. And that's the next step of that. Now again, I can't do the AP military shader. While I could technically dry this off really quickly and seal it, the problem is those washes actually take a while to dry themselves. I'm actually going to hit this underside a little bit more, just to give it a little. It doesn't need a ton of personality, like it's the underside of the mech. Who really cares? The nice thing about these dry brushes is they really kind of, these makeup brushes as dry brushes that Josh and Billy introduced me to, they really do a good job of picking out details very easily. So I'm going to run that across the edge of this calf plate right here, shin plate, shunk. See ya? See how it picked out that highlight really nicely, really quickly and easily? Same thing. Alright, and over here. Same thing. Okay. Again, sorry it's upside down. I'll rotate my miniature, not my brush. Camera's fine, I promise. This is actually how I'm doing this. Yeah, the time zones are a struggle for me. Okay, so that is our Marauder. So now you can see the difference between where that Marauder got to and this Victor. Okay, so now side by side. And again, no particular difficulty in what I'm doing here. You guys saw the process. No super fine brush control or anything. There is some brush control and just making sure that when you're doing this, you are picking out the right things, right? So I don't want to just like slop it all over, but hold on. I do want to, like, if I want to go in here, there you go, get the edge of that panel a little bit, just like I did on the Marauder. Shrink. Yeah. Same over here. Same over here. I'm doing a little more yellow bone on this. Again, probably skipping and messing up some steps. But you know what? It's just paint. It's an old plastic Marauder. It doesn't match anything else in this, which are all new sculpts anyway, so I don't mind if it looks a little different, personally. It's a little fun for me to have something I can just play around with, and no pressure here to make anything super fun to show off. Though I should post this in all the forums and tell them it's the new Victor. It's the new plastic Victor. I can do that. I can definitely continue this video series through after GenCon. Now that hopefully this is recorded and hopefully Ryan can show me how to take it off here, and I know the video quality is not the best. It's a little spotty because of things like the white balance and stuff, but hopefully it is useful enough. There we go. Alright, and that's where we're terminating that for now. So next step for this guy would be the dry pigments. I'm going to try one more thing with the light. Again, I apologize for my experimenting. Oof. Yeah, this is rough. Okay. Okay, so we have a few more things we can go over. One of which is this guy that I was messing with the other day. So it's an Alpha Strike Dervish. Okay, and I also have this Orion. This Orion was something I did forever ago. And the Orion at the time was in a phase where I was trying to highlight every single panel, which is not something I do anymore. Now I kind of give these overall shapes. So you can see a very similar color here, but the way I executed it over these two, over a time frame of like a year or so, very, very different. Trying to get the camera to focus on them. Okay, there you go. So one has these kind of broad highlights that span the mech and don't really pay attention to individual panels. They look at the bigger forms. And the other one, this Orion, really focuses on the individual panels. Hey, how's it going? So we're going to go in here and we're going to give a little bit of attention to the larger, broader forms on this Orion with a little bit of that yellow bone. And if you all don't know, Mig Jimenez Yellow Bone is, of the oil brushers, probably my favorite. One of my go-tos. So I'm going to start with this, you know, trademark Orion head and the tops of the pivots over there. And again, Not only do I not have a print of the new Orion, but embarrassingly, I'm the one who designed it, and I just haven't gotten around to printing it yet. I've been very behind on my printing. So, soon, hopefully. Same with the Loki, actually. I did that too, and I have not printed it yet. And I don't own one. So hopefully one day soon. Alright, I'm going to hit... Now again, I'm going to reverse the highlights a little bit. I'm going to do some bottom corner ones over here. Try and break up this form. And then... Yeah, the pose on the Loki really was a bummer. Well, the pose, I chose kind of a leaning gunslinger pose, the intent being that it was like almost like it was looking up at Twycross, but then it got so bent. The prototype that was shown off was so bent out of shape that it makes it look like a goofy pose and not at all what was intended, which is a bit of a bummer. If you saw the original, like, prototype print from China, the orange ones, which I think they showed off, I thought the pose looked pretty cool. Alright, so we're just doing some kind of broad highlights, trying to bring out these divisions and shapes. By the way, these are just cheapo, like, $5 makeup brushes. I know that apparently the really nice brushes for oils are like a very nice version of this. And I don't doubt that they are superior. Oh, has it? That's good. I mean, I assumed that the pose issue is just the bend in it being a soft plastic miniature as opposed to a rigid resin print. All right. Yeah, so to my eye, at least, I prefer this. It's kind of softer, less exaggerated highlights all over, as opposed to these very jarring, I felt, highlights that were just on individual panels, and that to my eye was busy. I wasn't able to really get a feel for the miniature like that. So now what we're going to do is we are going to do some shadows on this as well. So weirdly, this is a very blue gray that I'm working with on both of these miniatures. It's same gray. I think it's I'm gonna say U.S. Navy Intermediate Blue, which is a Tamiya spray can. I want to say is what this is. But despite being a bluish gray, I kind of hit both the shadows and the highlights with warmer colors. So I use a yellow bone for the highlights, and for the shadows, I'm going to use a very dark brown. Dark enough that it's not even showing up on this black, basically. Which is a mix of its translucency and the actual color in question. Alright, this is a kind of a muddled area, and that's my fault. I feel like I didn't really commit to putting the lighter shadow in one place in the center torso, and that's on me. I didn't really do a great job there, but that's okay. It's just a plastic toy robot. Not a big deal. If if the shadows aren't right on the plastic toy robots I paint, I think I'm going to be able to get through the rest of my day perfectly fine. Thank you very much. That's the worst thing that happens to me today. Ain't that bad a day. Alright. Gonna really slam the underside of this with some of that. And these were originally test schemes for Genyosha, and I wound up going with a much lighter gray. But, well, this is not the scheme I went with for the Genyosha. It's good to... It took a lot for me to get a decent gray color I was happy with. So now, you know, it's cool to kind of come back to this gray color that I struggled with and wasn't super thrilled with. And see if I can give it the love to make it a color I am happy with again. Alright, trying to... Man, the washing out here really is killing me. I'll try one more thing. See, every now and then this works, and then sometimes it doesn't at all. Sorry, guys. Gonna hit this head with some of that brown as well. Okay. So here's where these two have landed so far. So the Orion definitely pops a lot more than it did with all the handwork. And I feel the same way about this Dervish, which I had kind of started roughly the other day. Sorry, well, I had originally started, like, I don't know, a year and a half ago when I was testing out the scheme when I told Ed that I would paint him some Genyosha. And it took me a long time to kind of get back to it. There we go. Oh my god. There's like a specific area that I can get it to, and as soon as I move my hand it flickers and the light refocuses. If I ever have a more proper painting studio section, I will get a better setup. But for now, I am cell phone based. There we go. It seems like there's an exact spot I have to keep my hand in. And if I do that, it will keep the exposure correct. Which is around over there. Alrighty. Okay, so now we've done some of this technique with grays. You know what? Looking at these two together, this Dervish has a lot more white. So we're going to go in and hit the Orion with some more of the yellow bone as well. So when you're doing a scheme, either keep a paint log, and you also always have to keep a reference mini at hand. I tend to do, like, when I'm trying a new scheme, I tend to do 3 or 4 at once, just to start it out and kind of get a process down. And then after that, I always keep 1 or 2 of them on hand while I'm painting the next ones in the scheme, just to make sure, I treat it kind of like a control in an experiment, right? You're having this reference point just to make sure you're always referencing back to it. And it's very important to use the same reference point. Don't update your reference point. Don't, like, you know, do a mini, then swap out your reference point for the new mini, because what will happen then is you will slowly change the way it looks over the course of all your minis. Okay, I'm noticing one of the spots that really needs this front top of the head needs a very bright highlight to draw the eye. We had to define this little trapezoid pretty sharply. Just by getting some of those bright colors in there. I know not everyone is thrilled about the new Orion head change to the triangle, but I personally am. I think that the split window is a very important part of the look of this mech. Without it, it just turns into kind of an everyday generic assault mech, to my taste. Hey, what's going on? Alrighty. And that's about that for this, guys. Again, nothing complicated here. Just hitting it with the oil brush. That's why I always rotate and take a look. See if you spots it. They aren't bright enough or aren't blended right. I'll probably put some of these up on eBay that I've done during this tutorial, by the way, once I finish them up. Lately, I've been very much focusing on trying to get like a company done of each, so for myself. So anything that's like a one-off scheme, I might start putting up, getting rid of, etc. Alrighty. So that's that. Let's compare it, just make sure. Alright, that's a lot more in the zone. Looks like the Dervish needs a little darkening down on his chest plates. Hit that with a little brown. Brown, brown, brown. Okay. That feels a little better. Sweet! Do I have any... Are able to... I do. Hold on. Let me think if I have any that are in progress. So I can show you what happens to the Davian ones. But there's also another stage of highlight in there. Okay. So, after the olive drab wash, let me grab some of these. Hold on. Okay, so pre-wash, and this is, sorry, pre-dry pigment. Alright, this is post-dry pigment. Sorry, let me get the white balance right for this. Post-dry pigment, post-second highlight phase. Okay. Then, this is after the wash, and then after a third highlight phase, this time with kind of yellowier, paler colors. So you see how this slowly goes from a very green, it starts a little browner, then it goes greener and greener, and then it gets browner again. So, here we go. Let me move some of this out of the way. And the wash is military shader, which is kind of a greenish brown. And then for the pin wash in the panel lines, hold on, which you'll be able to see here in a moment. The pin wash in the panel lines, you can see that that's a rust red. You kind of make it out. You kind of see it there too, all right? That's a little rust red oil pin wash I give it at a certain point. It is a little hard to make out because it is a little subtle. But it is in there. Let me see if I can find... Oh, it's very evident on the back. There we go. It's more evident on the back. You can see that most of that shadow has a rust red hue to it. Okay? I like the way that pops when going against a green, and the same goes for a blue. Okay, you can see it in there as well. Alright, and that's that, there it is. That's that rust red wash for the panels, okay? And that's after that overall glaze and wash phase of the AP military shader. Okay, so if we go back to our handy dandy paint notebook, one moment. Also, you shouldn't really do what I'm doing, grab the Marauder that has wet oils on it. Okay. Alright, so that's the military shader next. Then we do the buff highlights. Then is the rust wash after that. Okay? And then we're going to do final highlights that are very kind of yellowy grayish. And then final highlights of just the yellow bone again. And if you were watching Kevin's stream, he mentioned this and he's 100% right. He said basically, this whole exercise is just an exercise of going back and forth, right? Tone it up, knock it down, turn it all the way up, and then knock it back down a little bit. Turn it all the way up, knock it back down a little bit. So you're just kind of doing this back and forth phase until you get it into the area you want. And that's, that's one of the things with miniatures painting that really does require some patience. So the last thing we're going to do today, something I did last time that was demanded, so I have one of my big landing pads right here. I actually can't fit the whole thing on the camera, so that is actually going to replace, that's going to be the entire camera bed now, okay? It was way too big to fit more than like a quarter of it at a time. So last time, hold on one sec, let me just rinse off that oil brush using a little mineral spirits first, or technically lavender spike oil. All right. You never need to, nice thing about it is you don't need to rush about that. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a little smoothing of this, and this is something that Josh Mac the Maker taught me, and I have never stopped doing since. So we have a few different things here. We're going to want to smooth the top surface. Let me try and find a kind of problem area. There we go. Look at that. So right there, you see there's some like minor gaps in the top finish. That's pretty typical for 3D printing. You see most of it's very smooth, but every now and then you are going to get something like that. Not a big deal. And then the other thing is we're going to have these areas that you can see I added glue to them because I do want them closed. But these panels I want separated, but these ones I want joined into one big panel. Same with that little guy. So this really is better suited to something like Bondo, an epoxy-based kind of strong structural gap filler. But I am going to do it with this anyway, just because it's what I have on hand. So first step is getting it out of the tube, and because this is kind of an old tube of perfect plastic putty, that's going to require a little fishing around. I'm really kind of on its last legs right now. Okay, so normally you would put this on a pallet. Because this is such a large piece, I'm just going to go ahead and squeeze it directly onto the piece. Not a big deal, because it sands off super easy. But it is reluctant to come out of the tube. Again, normally this is not the way to do it. Alright, and then we're going to take a brush with water. Yeah, I love using reds and browns and purples for my miniatures, my green miniatures, and I paint a lot of green. Green is probably my favorite color to paint. Okay, so you see I'm just kind of mixing in water. Let's get the camera to focus on that. There we go. Until I'm making kind of a thinned acrylic paint consistency. Now, I can do this a lot of different ways. There's no thickness that's wrong, but I like to see it get to basically the thickness of a glazed out acrylic paint. Which, if it's something like Vallejo model color, is probably like 2-to-1 paint to water for the consistency we're looking at. And you'll also note there's some bubbles in here. My paint water, I almost always leave a little bit of rubbing alcohol and a little bit of Windex in the water. I squirt a little in. Helps break down surface tension, and when you're dealing with little holes like this, little tiny gaps, it's going to help it get into those gaps. Basically the same reason you do it with an airbrush is why you're going to do it with this putty. Whether or not that affects the structural integrity in any significant way, that I can't speak to. I haven't noticed any negative effects, so hopefully not. So now what you do is you kind of go in and just paint it around. Don't hit the, try not to get in the panel lines. If you do, it's not that big a deal. You can scrape it out, you can wet it. This is something that can be reactivated by water. So you can go back in and hit it with water again to soften it up. And this is not a process I do just for FDM miniatures. I do this for all my resin prints too, like all the prototype mechs. I also hit with a few layers of very fine, obviously. You don't get to slop it around. You have to go in there with kind of almost a detail brush, but same process. And also you notice that you probably can't see it, but over here where there are those bigger gaps, there's also depth because I literally just slapped on a bunch of super glue to help fill that gap and give it some strength. So that obviously is going to require a bit more sanding on my part. Because this is such a large flat area, I actually suspect I might just take an orbital sander to it with 400 grit. And again, kind of like my miniature painting with the oils, you can see this is I like to say that most of my steps in my process are very procedural. They're not steps that change from miniature to miniature. They're not very specific, focused steps. They're just kind of a lot of, do this process to the whole thing, which for me is very relaxing and almost meditative. I could do this while I watch a movie or something, and I don't have to worry about screwing up a miniature that I spent so much time on. I only need to worry about the last few steps. Sorry, I'm off camera now. Whoops! Accident. There we go. Okay. I can watch a movie and just kind of relax and not have to worry about anything except at the last few phases where I do cockpit jeweling and some potentially final highlights. Those are the only things that I need to really focus in on. The rest I can just kind of lay back, watch some dumb TV, and wind down my day. Though I don't recommend painting on the couch if you use dry pigments. You will eventually have not so much an accident as a disaster. Yeah, I've done that. I think most of the times that I've tried streaming, I have dropped the camera at some point. All right, we're gonna squeeze out more of this. Again, directly onto it. Nice thing about this giant pad is it does act like a palette. Again, bunch of water. And that's gonna both thin it and also prevent it from drying out while we're working with it. All right. And make sure you do mix it up nicely, because you don't want to get big chunks, but if you do, also not that big a deal. Okay, I'm gonna move this forward a little bit. Gotta move some of my mechs out of the way, out of frame. And this is because I've had people ask me, how do you get the really smooth results on FDM? It's not magic. And I don't think you need to go to this level. Depending on the miniature, I will, what it is. If it's a building, I will probably give it 1 to 2 passes of this. Something like the mech hangar, because it is a more detailed piece and I'm pretty excited for it, I am going in and giving it, I gave it 2 full passes and a third kind of half pass on spots that needed it, because I was very excited for those details. I want to make sure they shine and your eye isn't distracted by, print lines or anything. And then a drop ship is where any kind of vehicle is where I spend the most time. Like the little plane or the drop ship, because that little cargo plane I worked on recently is so small. I did 3 or 4 layers because why not? It doesn't take long. It's super fast to do. This is called Perfect Plastic Putty, and it is on Amazon. I know that Michigan Toy Soldier carries it, which is a very popular place to pick up this stuff. If Josh Mack is still in here, are you in here, Josh? If so, can you drop a link? I don't know if he is, though. And I am at the putty. Whoop, Sorry I keep shaking the camera. It's kind of a fast and dirty process, so it winds up being I'm a little loose with my hands. Oh, I'm off camera again. And you see over here where there's these grates, I'm kind of steering clear because I don't want to fill in the grates. It's not worth it. If I have a little bit of lines over there, I'm not that worried about it. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Yeah, this is, Josh like really saved my life with this stuff. I was trying to use the Tamiya Putty, which is lacquer based. And if you've ever worked with lacquer based putties, they are a pain in the butt to clean. They're not cheap. They don't have like any common solvents. So if you mess up, you got to carve that thing off, or you got to sand it off. If you mess up, you really messed up, you know? And then he turned me onto this stuff, and I just fell in love with it. And I have gone through probably, I mean, it tells you it does last a while, especially when thinned, because I think in this whole time of using it on every single miniature I've had, I've probably only gone through 2 or 3 tubes so far. Sorry, trying to squeeze more of this out. And I have like 2 more tubes around. I'm just being cheap and trying to get the last out of this little tube before I toss it. And also, Mac the Maker has if you don't mind dropping a link again, I'm sorry if I'm like bothering you while you're on your phone. He's got a really great tutorial for working with this stuff. Oh yeah, the fumes are really bad on the Tamiya Putty. It's really stinky. I don't like working with it at all. There's also another putty Josh has recommended to me that I'm going to wind up using probably in these cracks, but I don't have like right at hand. It's off to the side somewhere and I have to dig for it. And that's this two-part epoxy putty that's like gray that I used for some of the rocks in last year's GenCon Alpha Strike board. And it's just really good because I basically puttied a bunch of my terrain layers together and made one large mega terrain. And that was very good, like, for something that I needed to be structural and beefy and really stand up to a beating. And it worked. I only had one tiny break that had nothing to do with that. And all that terrain shipped successfully over from Texas to Indianapolis. So I was really happy with the way that held up and super grateful for that recommendation. Yeah, the Vallejo one is also, it's water-based, but like, so I've tried it, and I've also tried mixing it with this, but it doesn't want to sand well. It's so flexible that when you try to mess with it, it sands very oddly. It kind of like peels back up. It doesn't have the rigidity of this or liquid green stuff. I have not had success with it at all. That being said, I have messed with the formula of this a lot, and I've taken it and kind of mixed in things like acrylic medium, glaze medium, when I have needed to give it like a bit more strength or a bit more flexibility, and I found that was very successful. You can kind of really mess with this formula a little bit to adapt it to your needs. White glue is another one that I've mixed in. And white glue, obviously, is pretty similar to acrylic medium. Polyvinyl acrylate, PVA, same thing. All right, so I've done a lot of this. Hopefully, I was going to say, hopefully most of this is dry, but it looks like very little of it is dry. So I'm going to give it just a few seconds of hanging out and drying. There we go. Let me try to cap this. Oh my god, this tube is really on its last legs. I think I'm going to have to just cut it up and try and use it from the back if I want to get the last of it out there. So, popping that in there. So you can see this is the state of this right now. And this is this and the monitor are two like giant pieces, obviously, that have a ton of surface area. So, you know, they probably eat up the most putty and the most time, but you can see this thing, it wasn't that bad. It didn't take too long. The monitor is a monster. That thing takes forever. I don't think it was milliput. You know what? While this is drying, hold on one moment. You know, unfortunately, whatever it wasn't milliput. Whatever it was that Josh turned me on to, I think I used all of it up last Gen Con. I don't think I have any around. So if he's here, hopefully, I suspect today he's actually at his shop. So he's probably here, but he's probably wandering in and out so far. Let's see how this is doing. Oh, still a little wet. So you can kind of see usually where the wet parts are. They'll have like a little ring, so you can see like right there, look, that's definitely a wet right there. It's got that little darker ring, and it'll be shiny too, which is probably harder for y'all to make out on camera. But maybe you can see it once this is tilted a little bit. Who knows? But yeah, basically, this is still wet. This is wet over here. This is unfortunate. I guess I went a little heavier than I meant to, or it's too humid in my house, because usually this is a pretty quick dry. So I'm sorry to keep you guys waiting for a minute. Yeah, see, I figured. Hey Josh, do you have that? It's that gray 2-part epoxy putty that you turned me on to. I don't remember the name of it, and I'm all out of it. I think it's humid in my house, in my game room. Yeah, in Arizona. What is humidity? Alright. Kind of testing this. Epoxy sculpt. There we go. That's it. So I use ripped up 400 grit sandpaper, by the way. Like the pads, because that's just what I have around. As I've said before, this is not the most cost efficient thing to do. You probably just want to buy sheets of 400 grit emery cloth or something. But it's just what I have. So you can see over here, I just give it a quick little scuff. And usually I do this before I do any actual puttying. I guess I skipped it because I forgot. I don't know why I skipped it. But what this helps to do, and we'll be able to see this a little better. Here we go. What this helps to do is it kind of gives you the topography. So you can see those darker sections are low sections, right? Where clearly the print is a little bit lower, and those lighter sections are the sections that the sandpaper hit, so you know it's a little higher. So when you see something like this right here, where it's pretty uniformly light, great. That means we already have a pretty smooth surface. When you see something like right over here, like there's like a little ridge, okay? So we know, okay, we're gonna have to hit that a little bit with some sandpaper. Same over there, right? There's a little dark spot. We might want to hit that with a little putty. And you're going to start to see these same kind of patterns emerge as we sand. I showed this off. This is something that, like, really, it's on its last, now it should be done, but you can see we have the last coat of paint that I had, which was a gray, and then it goes through to the red primer, and then you have spots where you get through to that putty too. And this was a weird one. I think I melted it or something by accident, so it's got some like weird low spots, but you can see kind of, as it goes on there, you can see like some of those print lines right there. Hold on, we'll focus the camera. There you go. And you can see how things like the putty and the paint fill those in. And while this is something you can't see, it is finger smooth. Here, if you'll hear it, you won't hear any like rigid, like as it goes across. Listen. It's nice and smooth, right? There's nothing that your finger is going to catch on. That's kind of my go-to to make sure, all right? Okay, so let's see. What's dry? Okay, we have some dry sections starting over here. All right, focus. There we go. Okay, so I'll hold this down a little bit. There we go. And I just kind of do a circular motion. I think that technically you're probably supposed to go across the grain, just like would be the best thing to do. But like realistically, who cares? To be honest. And again, you see I have this like horrible spot right here because I just glopped on glue like an idiot on the top just to make sure it was structurally sound. That was dumb of me. I'm gonna pay for it. Now I'm gonna have to like do extra sanding and stuff, but it's not that big a deal. I just made a little extra work for myself, which is something I do pretty frequently, so it's not that big a deal. I'm right now just going around and hitting the spots that are actually dry. Unfortunately, that's not that many of these panels yet. Now, if you don't remember to go ahead and blow this off between phases or brush it off, this dust is going to clog up your panel lines, okay? And you don't really want that to happen. So just always remember that you're going to have to do that. All right, let's see. Again, I'm just kind of fishing around for the spots that are actually dry enough for me to do. Okay, there you go. This is a great example of what we're looking for right here. I'm going to zoom this camera in. Okay. So you see right there, this is the panel line, which we want to clean out real quick. Quick and dirty cleaning. Alright. Now if you see, we have that white line right there, right? And what that means is we had like a little dip where when the printer did a perimeter layer, there's like a tiny dip between that and that fill layer, okay? So that's what we're looking for. We want to see that. We want to see this kind of differentiation in color. If you're only seeing one color, that means you didn't fill anything successfully. All you did was just add a layer on top, and you're still at that layer. You're not at a smooth layer, you're just at a kind of top layer or something else. And now I'm definitely hitting some wet putty. I'm just not caring that much, to be honest. So you see the center, again, I hit that glue on these seams and in the center, so that's where I have this, like, has depth. Like if you watch this, see it's kind of catching there. It's because there's like a good millimeter or two of glue that I really don't want to be there. But if you don't want it to be there, then don't make the mistake. So now I have the dubious pleasure of getting to do a bunch of extra sanding throughout the course of this process, which, again, really not ideal, but that's what I get for being impatient. I did this literally I glued this together about 10 minutes before the stream, and I really didn't want it falling apart because I hadn't glued it right, so I quickly just glopped a bunch of glue on the top. So, don't do that. That part's a mistake. You do the putty part, just don't do the glopping the glue part. Okay, this is all wet, so I'm going to stay away from that, but this is dry. Again, there's really nothing I'm doing here is particularly special or innovative. The only real interesting thing I think is the use of this putty, which came from Josh. And then beyond that, I think one thing I do is I definitely thin it out probably a lot more than most people do. I like being able to apply it by brush. I think that's convenient and handy. Because I like painting, and it just feels like very lazy painting. Just kind of going in there and trying not to get it in the panel lines, and that's the whole thing, Again, it's just a little form of relaxing, and it feels like woodworking to me. Is the thing I tell people. If you've ever worked with like something like Aquagel, which I actually tried on FDM printing, and it worked out pretty well. Aquagel is a clear finishing product used to get that really glass finish on wood, and it's basically just a clear plastic putty. And I've used that before. My first thing I ever smoothed, which was the Gepard, I smoothed with Aquagel because I was like, you know what? This reminds me of wood grain. Let's try treating it like wood grain. And it worked pretty well, but I find that this is better. And just the ability to thin it with water. Now, don't know if anyone said. No. So you can also, you have the option of just taking this and taking a wet rag and just wiping it off, because it will, you know, become, I don't know what the word is. You'll be able to, it becomes a putty once more if it's wet. So that has a good side and a bad side. The good side is that you can just wipe it off, especially if it's, you know, there's too much of it. The bad side is if you tried to go over this with just a water-based paint right away, you're in some trouble. So what I do is, as soon as I do a layer of this, I go back and I get rid of all the dust. I basically bang it out real quick, you know, upside down, before I hit it with a layer of primer again, this red primer that I use, this rust red primer. And that'll both seal that in, and the primer kind of acts as an additional layer of filler as well, which I really love, because anything that I don't have to do by hand, you know, that if a spray paint's going to do some work for me, that's awesome. Let's do that, right? Let's not waste my time. All right. So you see, I haven't puttied this section, but I'm hitting it a little with sandpaper anyway. And so here, instead of seeing the putty and the primer, you're starting to see the actual filament, this like black filament underneath, right? This black ceramic filament that my whole session has been an advertisement for. In case y'all haven't kept up or you missed the first part of the stream, I'm apparently doing product placement, and I expect to check in the mail at some point soon from ceramic. Which I said was a pretty okay filament. So maybe I won't get a check. I did not have universally great things to say. I had some great things to say. Take care. Thanks for coming. All right. Okay, so I'm going to step away for one moment real quick, go bang out some of the dust in the garage because I don't want that in my little game room here, and then give this a quick hit of primer. I'll be right back, guys. Alrighty, folks, I am back. So, yeah, sorry about that. So, I couldn't hit the whole thing because I've got some wet putty yet, but I basically sprayed around where I could hit. And you'll be able to see as this dries, that the sections that were puttied, which is here and over here. And now here you can see, by the way, that glue that I was talking about where I glopped it on again. That's my problem that I caused for myself. But the rest of this, you can see that we have a pretty nice smooth finish there after one coat and a tiny bit of putty and sandpaper. Well, not a tiny bit of putty, a decent amount of putty and sandpaper. But it's a quick, pretty painless process that I think is easy to skip and really shouldn't be, because it really ups your results from something that looks like, you know, it came off a 3D printer to something that really showcases, you know, what it could be. And whether it's resin or FDM, I really do think that putty is something that I'm a big proponent of. Alrighty, folks, that's about all I've got. We've painted some mechs over there, right? We've done some puttying and sanding. Does anyone have any questions or anything? We have like a 20 or 30 second delay between when I speak and you can hear me, so. For the oil to dry, it depends. So usually, I think it's somewhere between like 8 hours to 2 days, depending on the thickness of the oils. If you added some kind of, you know, mineral spirits or thinner. That being said, if I have a layer of oil that I'm going to go over, I typically wait 1 day, and then I go over it with a layer of Decal, Tester Gel Coat, or a similar sealant. And I'll wait that 1 day, and then I'll seal it up, and then I'll continue to paint. Whether or not it's fully dry under there, I have no idea. I do know that it kind of cures on its own after the fact. Sorry, just noticed I have a little bit of not smooth right there. See how one gun pod is nice and smooth and the other one's got a little bit of a sudden. Oh. So you see, this paint from earlier is still pretty active. I can still work with it. There we go. But yeah, I'd say somewhere between like, I don't know, 8 and 48 hours to be safe. But again, I always seal it after a day, so I don't need to worry about like dust getting caught in it. I have a dog who's shedding constantly, so you know it's constantly a battle of make sure you seal the mini and make sure there was no hair on it when you sealed it, and you know, so that's part of my process. Has to do with my dog. My paint along series, never. If I ever do get a proper camera setup, I would actually consider it. But as this is, it doesn't do it justice to anyone watching, or to my time either. I think because I've had a lot of exposure and focus problems going through this. But if I ever do get it set up to the point where I feel like you can very clearly see what I'm working on throughout the stream, then I would definitely do more of those, or at least more live painting. I'd be happy to at that point. Any other questions, guys? If not, I'm gonna call it. All right, I think we're good. So I want to thank everyone for coming by. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go paint some mechs, or some terrain, or something. I know we don't have a real GenCon in person, but I hope y'all are at least taking a little time for yourself to enjoy the time that you might have had at GenCon if you were there. Alrighty, y'all. Thank you so much for coming by. Bye, guys.
Shutdown sequence initiated.